Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh, and today we're diving into the lore and story learnings from Overwatch's short story Rebuilding Ruins by Corinne Duyvis and Sangu Mandanna, starring the brilliant Symmetra and her old friend Niran, or LifeWeaver. In this story we explore the past of Symmetra and LifeWeaver and their relationships with Vishkar, discover what both have been up to since, and the fascinating innovations of the Atlantic Arcology and the faction known as the Collective in the midst of a Null Sector attack. I'll be covering all of the lore talking points, interesting bits of the story, a little light speculation on what may come next and what new lore we've learned from it too. Suffice to say, this contains spoilers. This story is on the website, not all of the stories from the Heroes Ascendant book are, so timecodes in the description below if you want to skip. Do give it a read if you want to, and either way, come back, watch this, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Right, let's get stuck in. Firstly, a summary of the story. Satya Vaswani, known to us as Symmetra, is sent on a mission by her employers, the Vishkar Corporation, to the Atlantic Arcology. Set immediately after the events of Paris in the 0 Hour trailer, her task is to seek the assistance of her former friend and former Vishkar employee Niran Pruksamani, or LifeWeaver, who now resides and works at the Arcology. As we know, both were once close friends during their time at Vishkar's Architect Academy, but we know that Niran left Vishkar, taking his, at the time, fledgling Biolight technology with him. Vishkar claims ownership of this technology, and Satya is sent to either retrieve it or hopefully Niran, especially to help in the aftermath of the Paris Null Sector attack. On arriving, Satya admires the stunning beauty and innovation of the Arcology and its architecture, which houses many of the world's preeminent scholars and artists of the time, who have formed an organisation known as the Collective. The beauty of the central spire made from the duovidro material of the Martans leaves her very awestruck as she takes in the beauty of the scene in an almost sensory overload type fashion. She is, however, apprehensive about meeting Niran after so many years. It's been 11 since she last saw him, and a lot has happened since then. Niran is now very deeply involved in the Arcology's projects, particularly those aiding Omnic refugees with their own specific tailored living spaces, and he is running late for their meeting. Saying that Vishkar had said that an emissary was coming, but they'd not specifically mentioned who, Niran seems surprised to see Satya, and the two have a slightly awkward reunion. Seeing that she's arrived by helijet, the two size each other up in negotiations, and Niran says that he won't actually even entertain any discussions unless Satya promises to take their very efficient train system back, rather than the rather expensive and perhaps environmentally unfriendly helijet that Vishkar has sent her in as a bit of a statement. Having flashbacks to their childhood and previous friendship, Satya gets straight to the point. Vishkar would like a return of either Niran or his technology, or perhaps both, to aid in Vishkar's rebuilding efforts in Paris. Niran asks if Vishkar are the people that he should be trusting, and Satya is challenged by this. She has been having her own doubts about Vishkar since the events of her short story Stone by Stone. In the slightly awkward silence after this exchange, Niran decides to take Satya on a tour of some specific Omnic living quarters that he has been helping them try to design. In seeing a space that's meant to be designed Omnic first with their needs in mind and with them, Satya feels that she can relate to this a little with her autism and the various needs that she has. Although she has a better time of it now as a senior executive, she had a lot of problems when she was at the Vishkar Academy. With a series of memories of her and Niran's shared past threatening to overwhelm her, Satya challenges Niran and asks him why he left her, given that they were such close friends, and Satya finds it hard to trust people. While sticking to the Vishkar script that she's been given, Niran makes it very clear that he left for other reasons, and that Satya has been lied to. He was not looking to profit by leaving with his Biolight inventions. Niran shows around him and challenges Satya as to whether that's actually the case or not, given that his work is with the Arcology and the Collective now. Believing that Vishkar do catastrophic damage in their quest for profit and influence, Niran tries to explain to Satya that he had other reasons for leaving. Understanding that he doesn't intend to return to Vishkar, Satya is escorted to the transport hub by Niran and is just about to leave when Null Sector attack. The Null Sector Omnics, bursting out of trains, one of which had apparently come from London, appear to be targeting the Omnics around them first, with humans being collateral damage. As Niran, Bua, his nickname, or LifeWeaver, gets to work healing people, Satya fights back against the Null Sector warbots. Seeing a rhino-like huge bot explode out of a train carriage, she uses teleporters to drop another broken train carriage on top of the rhino bot. We see Symmetra's full kit, teleporters, yes, even her turrets and shield barriers all used, with Satya or Symmetra being in awe of the beauty and the strength and development of LifeWeaver's Biolight since she saw him last. When there's a lull in the fighting and seeing that there are more casualties of the Arcology's residents than of the actual Null Sector attackers, Satya realises that their true priority is the Omnics hiding downstairs in the Omnic living quarters. Using her teleporters to cross vast distances, Satya arrives just in time as a bunch of Null Sector bots are looking to break down shields and get to the Omnics within. Given her recent appreciation of the Omnic living space and the principles it stands for, Symmetra makes a decision. She decides to hold up a barrier, preventing any of the Null Sector troops from getting inside, rather than taking out all of the troops individually. Prioritising protecting both the Omnics and the beautiful space that has been created, she makes a decision to put herself at severe risk, and indeed takes a shot to the leg for doing so. However, this is now in the faith that she believes that Niran or LifeWeaver will show up. Mending the cracks in the wall, Niran, or Bua now as she calls him by their childhood nickname, and unleashing volleys of Biolight thorns, the Null Sector attackers are swiftly dismissed, with the severe wound on her leg completely healed by an example of LifeWeaver's Tree of Life. Satya, Symmetra, has a newfound appreciation of Bua's skills. The two reconcile their differences and explain their points of view, with Satya explaining how working within Vishkar's structures makes her feel that she can achieve more good and help more people than if she was fighting against them outside of the organisation. Given that the transport hub is destroyed, Satya will need her helijets to come and get them after all. However, she's in no hurry to get back, and she spends time with Bua as they repair the Arcology and look after injured people in the wake of the Null Sector attack. As the two part ways on the helipad, as the helijet comes to take Satya away, Bua gives her a note of caution. If she wants more answers about Vishkar, she needs to go and understand the legacy of Vishwakarma Bhatt, the founder of Vishkar Corporation. LifeWeaver says if she doesn't like the answers that she finds, and if the answers are what he suspects, then she's always welcome at the Arcology. Flying away, Satya, Symmetra, is sad that she has to leave, but knows that she has answers to find, a world to improve, in her words, and a friend to return to if she wants to. There's a summary of the story, quite a long one. Here are a bunch of things that I really enjoyed from it. Firstly, it's cool to see a whole bunch of details about Symmetra and LifeWeaver's past and their friendship together, as well as them being together at the Vishkar Architect Academy. We get a bit of timelining straight up to 11 years since they last seen each other at the academy before they had graduated. Symmetra, or Satya, is 30 now, so she was 19 when they went their separate ways. Also, it's mentioned that this is directly the day after the Paris attack of 0 Hour, so this is very early on. Between the setting of the Heroes Ascendant stories and the PvE, this is directly after 0 Hour and Winston's first recalled mission with him and May and Tracer. Now, through the journey of this story, we get Satya, Symmetra flashing back and reminiscing a lot about their past, a lot about how she kind of feels betrayed that Niran left, given that he was probably the only person she really trusted, but also such a close friend to her as well. Several times LifeWeaver's attention to detail and focus is mentioned. He could get totally lost in his work, but whatever occupied his mind at the moment, he would give his full attention. Satya admired this, but she'd often be the one to break him out of it if they needed to go to class, for example. They were very, very different. She was from a slum, sort of less privileged background. He was from a very wealthy family background, and they're very different personalities as well, but they seemed to be very, very close friends. He also had immense patience. He apparently kept her company as she practiced her dancing, as she repeated the same movement for hours on end. Satya is wondering why he left, and Niran has not found this easy either. Later in the story, he admits that he needed to compose himself when he heard that Satya was actually the person coming to represent Vishkar. As soon as they see each other again, it's very obvious that they're taking a moment. For a long moment, they watched each other as if taking in every detail of what had changed and remained the same over the past 11 years. Satya is here to try and persuade Niran to return to Vishkar, or perhaps return with his Biolight technology, ostensibly to try and help those who have been displaced by the Null Sector attacks in Paris and otherwise, but Niran is skeptical. The reason that he left Vishkar, he reveals to Satya, is because he has issues with the collateral damage and the way in which they go about conducting many of their operations and development projects. This revelation only comes out after Satya, whilst struggling to stay to the script, expresses her feeling of betrayal. She felt that Niren kind of abandoned her, given that the two were so close. In spite of the formal reason for them meeting once more, Niren is still courteous. He rejects Satya's and Vishkar's request, but he does care. He does tell her that if she needs help, and if Vishkar are making her do things she doesn't want to, she doesn't have to. But he reaffirms his commitment to using his technology for humanitarian purposes and points to the wonderful work done by the people at the Atlantic Arcology and the collective as being proof that whatever Vishkar told Satya about him wanting to sell his technology and use it for profit is clearly wrong. Satya feels hurt and is somewhat confused at these revelations. She says that she feels her time has been wasted because Niren was never going to entertain the question that she asked, and as a result he decides to take her back to the transport hub of the Arcology because, in his words, although it does hurt him to say it, according to the text, he doesn't want to waste her time either, echoing what she said. Now, the pivoting point for Satya in this is the Null Sector Attack, when bots travel in on a train or the train lines to the hub, one of which has come from London. She sees LifeWeaver's technology in action, she sees the beauty of it and the evolution of it from when she'd last known him 11 years ago, and she understands that he is being selfless and helping people here, and the context, along with the Omnic-specific architecture and living space that he's been working on, makes her realise that she has been lied to and that he is truly being selfless and trying to help people here. As a result, she puts her trust in him again. So when she runs downstairs to try and protect the Omnics who Null Sector are focusing on in order to try and put their neural inhibitors on top of them, she decides not only to protect the Omnics, but she also decides to protect the Omnic living space, when perhaps directly fighting the bots that were there would have been the quickest way to resolve the situation. However, they may have damaged the space. Niren has said that he feels that this Omnic-designed, catered living space is important, and Satya kind of got on board with this concept when she was on her tour. She puts herself at risk not only to protect the Omnics, but to preserve what Niren has created, but also to protect the idea and the sentiment of what he was trying to accomplish as well. He identifies that she put herself at risk, and she said, "Only briefly, I knew you'd be coming." So she puts her faith in him once more, and is proven that he is still there for her as a friend. And as friends, the two are able to agree to disagree and to try and understand each other's perspectives by the end of the story. She understands Niren or Boa's position, and he understands hers when she explains that much like her uncomfortable Vishkar uniform, her working for Vishkar, she sees it at the moment, perhaps not how she used to see it in the past, is a means to an end for her. She has had her concerns about how Vishkar achieve things, she knows she's been lied to, but in her words, she feels that instead of fighting against their path right now and achieving less, she can achieve more by trying to work with them and steer them in the right direction. So, as Niren puts it, it's a conscious compromise. By the time the story concludes and Satya leaves, they're sharing memories, remembering when Boa made Satya laugh out loud in a hard-like training exercise one time, and when Satya accidentally blocked the door to their room and collapsed the door frame, making them locked in the process. Secondly, we get a very cool picture of the Atlantic Arcology finally, and also a little bit as to what the sort of factional group known as the Collective are actually up to. Now, ever since Overwatch 2's early days in late 2022, Esperança was released as a push map. Now, people who translated some of the in-game audio that was in Portuguese at the time got a whole script, and that nodded to not only a couple known as the Martans, who we've learnt a lot more about the lore of recently, but the Arcology on one of the train timetables as well. The central spire of the Arcology towers into the sky. It projects underwater as well, and it's made of course of Duyvis, an ultra-hard sea glass that sparkles in the sunlight and casts prisms of colour. Duyvis was created by the Martans and used to protect Portugal and Spain in the first Omnic crisis, and became a fundamental part of their work and constructions going forward. Around the Arcology there are colourful corals and seaweed farms, reminiscent of the Maldives, but of course in the Atlantic. And with the organisation known as the Collective now based there, not only LifeWeaver and the Martans, but other preeminent scholars and artists had taken up residence. We also know from Overwatch Declassified that some of the Rogue God programs that used to be looked after by Overwatch when Overwatch was shut down were moved here, and AI research into them still goes on with results published on a sporadic basis. So if you haven't read Overwatch Declassified, you might not know that, but that's actually quite a good motivation for Null Sector to attack this place, even though we don't actually discover their motivation in the story, apart from, of course, the general goal that they have of putting these neural inhibitors on Omnics for some reason. The Arcology, according to Symmetra, struck a delicate balance as a brilliant feat of engineering, with every curve and support beam a glowing testament to the precision and innovation of the collective's architects. Yet, at the same time, it appeared as much a natural part of the sea as the schools of fish that darted around it, as though shaped over time by the water itself rather than placed by human hands. Inside the Arcology, it is almost like an entire city contained within its walls, with a huge plaza, a busy transportation hub, and lots of sustainability and self-sufficiency sort of built into it in terms of energy and similar. For example, hydroponic gardens and automation of essential services. The Arcology, as well as being a refuge for people like Niran, is also a refuge for some Omnics and displaced people too. Indeed, LifeWeaver has been working on specialised living quarters for Omnic refugees, trying to make places that feel like home, that are made for them and with them, rather than a temporary refuge too. With restaurants and food from around the world being one of the things that is highlighted on Symmetra's tour, the Arcology is very much presented as being a shining beacon of potential utopian scientific research, but also harmonious living. So of course it's all nicely set up to be attacked by Null Sector, of course, but it's very, very impressive to see so much detail on the Arcology. It's really gone into by Corinne, Duyvis and Sangu Mandanna, and who knows, maybe we'll get a level there someday, or a map. We also hear a bit more about the collective. Now the Martans obviously are members. We also know that of course LifeWeaver is there too. It seems that this bunch of people are basically advanced and dedicated to advancing human knowledge and creativity, free from the constraints of corporate and governmental influence. Now it's interesting because we also have Oasis in the world as well, which in the past has been described as similar. So we almost have like yin and yang here. The collective and the Atlantic Arcology are portrayed as very much being positive, coming from a place of well-meaning. And of course we know that Moira is over in Oasis, or is sometimes over in Oasis doing various things, and Oasis's reputation as being a place where science can happen free from boundaries, free from constraints, and perhaps free from, morals as well. So when Niran or LifeWeaver joined, he very much contributed to one of the collective's goals of leveraging the combined talents and resources of its members, all for each other's good. With everything from farming to art, and an art institute and gallery, to scientific research and fantastic growth of food and cooking of that food. It very much sounds like a utopian kind of environment, and the collective, it seem to be getting things right so far. So sounding like a very peaceful place, a peaceful body, with this humanitarian focus, this ideological foundation, support for Omnic refugees and other refugees, and these innovative and sustainable projects. The collective sounds like a group that is very much on a bettering humanity mutually, and really on a not-for-profit basis, it seems. So we'll see if that can continue now that they've been attacked by Null Sector in this second Omnic crisis. Thirdly, I've really enjoyed just taking a step back Symmetra's character development over the last 8 years, because this is kind of a crowning point, or a realization. It's not an end of her story arc, but it's kind of a journey that she's been on since her first comic way back in 2016. Now we've had a chunk of lore for Symmetra actually. We had her first comic, A Better World, where we saw her as a Vishkar agent working in Rio. We then saw her in Stone by Stone, of course, her short story with her experience with Zenyatta and the Sarvasa community, and then culminating in this, facing her past with LifeWeaver, with Niran, with Rua, of course, his nickname, which I haven't used too much here, sorry for that, and sort of positioning and understanding and putting her thinking together with him by understanding his position too, as well as their, of course, reacquaintance after all of these years. So as a quick sort of summary of that journey, in A Better World we saw Symmetra being the archetypal Vishkar fixer, as we saw it, and the closer, coming in and helping seal deals, push through problem projects, being used for sort of special tasks, in one case actually doing something pretty illegal in this comic, as her and Sanjay are in Rio trying to get a housing development and a slum redevelopment project through. Now Satya thinks that everyone resisting this change in this comic just doesn't understand, and she's very, very concrete in her belief that Vishkar is doing things better for people. Because there is some objection to this from one of the landowners, Satya is sent on effectively an industrial espionage mission to try and find if there's anything in the landowner's books that can be used against them. She finds nothing, fights her way out non-violently, but then sees that Sanjay actually destroyed the offices of the rival firm that's bidding on this contract. And in the fire and destruction that Sanjay has caused, Symmettra saves a child that she met earlier in the story, which reminds her a little bit of her own childhood in similar slums but in India, and begins to question and challenge the concept as to whether they are actually making the world a better place. So if in a better world the seeds of doubt are sown, then her journeys of this growing willingness to question authority in Vishkar, she is a lot more empathetic and tries to balance her duty with her personal values. She grows a lot in Stone by Stone. Now I've done an entire separate video on Stone by Stone, so if you want to check out that story and see it, you can see that linked in the description below and here. But as a very, very quick summary, she is sent to smooth over things with a local community due to some damage done to a statue. Now she discovers that it's the statue of Aurora, the inspiration of many Omnics, and indeed the reason why many Omnics got sentience. By staying with and learning from Zenyatta, she grows to appreciate different perspectives, different people's opinions, and tries to empathize with the loss of the community around this statue, perhaps over how Vishkar would have done it in a corporate manner. By collaborating with and understanding rather than just imposing a viewpoint, her ultimate repair and creation around the statue at the end is very, very impressive, and not only with the local community but also with the Omnic community too. And then of course we come to rebuilding ruins as the culmination of sorts in that journey. She is going to try and do Vishkar's bidding. She discovers and knows that it is Niran, it is LifeWeaver, and she is able to have that emotional conversation with him. She is able to understand by looking at the Omnic designed and tailored living quarters in space. With the community empathy and the sense of empathy that she's kind of learned a bit from her experience with Zenyatta, that really what this represents is something a lot more than just a living space catered for Omnics to make it feel like home. It's really a bigger ideal than that. And through understanding that and dealing with some of her emotions, she's also able to reconnect with Niran by the end of it, as well as contextualize, for the first time actually in any of the stories that we've had from her, what her place with Vishkar is and how she feels about it after this journey. She understands that she's been lied to. She knows that Vishkar, through her experience with Zenyatta, through her experience in Rio de Janeiro, and even perhaps here with regards to Niran, don't always do things the right way. They don't always tell the truth, but she feels that on balance she's able to do a lot of good with the resources that Vishkar has, and she's going to try and steer them on a better path. So it's cool to see this development of her character and her story, her learning more, empathizing more, discovering more about Vishkar, and then making her own sort of decision and path forward. Now there is a new path she can go on, but I'll talk about that a bit later. Now fourthly, it has been a trend that's been done increasingly and very, very sympathetically and very, very well throughout all of Symmettra's stories, but Symmettra is of course on the autistic spectrum, and I found it just cool in this story how multiple different things were called out, showing how Symmettra sees and views the world, how she tries to cope and manage the world and herself, and how this is sensitively portrayed in terms of her position on the spectrum. When she first lands at the Arcology, for example, her sensitivity to sensory stimuli is shown. For several moments she stood frozen, her fists balled by her sides as she waited for the worst of it to pass. The noise, the wind, the locks of hair tugging free from the tight bun she wore it in and now whipping violently around her face. The sensations screeched across her skull. This is kind of an intense sensory overload that she is suffering from, this kind of sensitivity to sensory stimuli, and indeed it can be a characteristic of or something that people experience when they're on the autistic spectrum. We've seen it in previous stories, but she also has a need for routine and predictability. She, from this quote, remembered vividly how proud the school management had been of the food quality and diversity they offered their students, surprising them with every meal. But Satya, for her part, had felt nothing but anxious every time she dragged herself to the dining hall without knowing what to expect. She also struggles sometimes with social interactions and remembers at school when she was told to make eye contact while answering questions, and even the struggle she had on stage during her graduation ceremony, where she was given a very specific list, or so she thought, of instructions to follow that she found very, very stressful to do. She is not the most expressive emotionally, or struggles talking about her emotions sometimes. Throughout the story, we see these and other examples of her masking, trying to sort of disguise or present as being not autistic, and we also see her actually trying to mask and a sign of her actual stimming. Satya had learned long ago to keep her hands still around others, distracted from her work, but she was not working now, she was simply talking to a friend. When Niran at the very end of the story comments on the fact that as the two are having a more pleasant and light conversation after all of the stress of the attack and of their meeting, she is doing a little hand dancing type gesture. Her moving her hands is putting her more at ease, it's helping her cope with the situation, be less anxious, and again, another example of something that some people on the autistic spectrum sometimes do and feel. So yeah, like in A Better World, like in Stone by Stone, a very, very sensitive and interesting portrayal of what being in this highly challenging, highly stressful, new environment and different situation might be for someone like Symmetra, who is on the spectrum. And I always find it cool that Overwatch step in and try and integrate this into their story in a way that feels sensitive and at the same time is also enlightening and interesting. Fifthly, we see Biolight and Hardlight technology in action and in practice, both in construction and in battle, which is pretty cool. I think it's kind of interesting to see the sort of difference in constructs and difference between not only the sort of two techniques, although they share this common core of Vishkar and of Dr. Butt's previous technology, but how Satya manipulates Hardlight and how Niran manipulates and creates his Biolight. Satya's Hardlight constructs are very geometric, rigid, precise. They reflect sort of not only Satya's personality, but Vishkar's emphasis on this order, on this efficiency, as it were. Whereas in contrast, you have a look at Niran's Biolight constructs, where they're very organic, as we've seen with LifeWeaver, flowers and trees, quite fluid, and they have these kind of natural forms. We've not seen Biolight used for similar. We do know that, of course, if we take the in-game ability and translate it into lore, then of course you can be moved physically by it. You can be placed on a petal and launched in the air in-game, or as in the story, maybe relocated to a safer place. In the story for Hardlight, we see Satya, of course, creating protective barriers, shielding people from harm. She threw up a Hardlight shield over those who had fallen from the train, in this quote, guarding them from the hail of energy projectiles behind them. And indeed we see a lot of Satya or Symmetra's whole kit, not just the kit recently, because obviously Symmetra's had a lot of reworks. We do not see a shield generator. That's the one thing we don't see. However, we do see Hardlight turrets, we do see barriers, we do see her teleporter. There's a very, very cool moment where she throws out a teleporter to teleport a train carriage that's about to fall off a train track on top of a giant rhino-style Null Sector bot that is about to wreak havoc in the transport terminal area. Now, interestingly, Satya's gauntlet is specifically shouted out as materializing her photon projector at the start of this. And then towards the end, there is also another quote where it specifically says that she is kind of almost running out of juice, out of energy, as it were, because she'd materialized so many teleporters and so many things on her way to trying to protect the Omnics. So we do get this sense that the gauntlet that she holds is a finite resource, as it were. It's not something that she can keep creating with, possibly without a recharge or replenishment for a continuous period of time. Looking at LifeWeaver, on the other hand, Biolight is obviously healing and protecting people, and also makes these structures that can move people and save lives during emergencies. We have one example, a massive leaf unfurled by two children, hunching over an unconscious adult, their faces red and tear-streaked. No, not a leaf, a petal, a lotus petal, one of several. The Biolight flower gave off a soft pink glow as it scooped up the family and whisked them to safety. Now, Symmetra actually finds the sight of Niran at work with this Biolight kind of mesmerizing. She'd seen his Biolight in action before, but they'd been children then. It had only been the seed of what it could become. His shape still unformed, his light dimmer and prone to an unsteady flickering. But 11 years later, he is growing saplings, he is growing trees, he's growing these lotus kind of leaves, and indeed Symmetra takes quite a burn and injury to her leg, and at the end Niran does a tree of life style creation that completely heals her leg very, very quickly. And indeed, the way in which he does this actually helps change Symmetra's mind, or helps her reconsider maybe what she was told by Vishkar about why LifeWeaver left. We also, of course, see the offensive capabilities of both. Symmetra's photon projector takes out several Null Sector bots. We see the Biolight thorns of LifeWeaver in action as he comes and saves, as it were, Symmetra when her projector is about to run out of juice in supporting and protecting the Omnics in the living facility from the Null Sector attack. So it's very cool to see exactly how Biolight for LifeWeaver works in kind of a canon situation, as well as how Hardlight works for Symmetra, and the various applications that these both have just in day-to-day, but also in combat too. It was also good to see Null Sector in action in a different sense, and also very, very soon after the actual beginning of the recent bigger wave, as it seems, of attacks. After Recall and the Museum, 0 Hour seems to be the first one that Winston and Overwatch 2 Electric Boogaloo get stuck into. So if this is earlier on in the wave of the conflict, then this is Null Sector at a very early stage of a bigger worldwide operation. Now, even though when the two and the security team initially fight off the first wave of attacks, Symmetra notices that most of the Null Sector troops have gone down to stem this because they're specifically targeting the Omnics with these neural suppressors, which LifeWeaver identifies when they've cleaned up and take time after the battle. Consistently alongside the cinematics that we've seen from Overwatch Invasion and the PvE missions, Null Sector, their priority isn't to cause destruction to humanity. Their priority seems to be to get these Omnics and get these neural suppressors on them almost above everything else. Now, who knows whether we'll get a second set of PvE missions, but there is a question there that's still waiting to be answered as to why this is being done and what the underlying motivation is. We see these Rhino-type bots in action outside of perhaps the PvE missions. It's the first time in the actual written stories that we see this kind of thing happening, which is pretty cool. Symmetra taking it down as well. And interestingly, when everything's said and done at the end of this story and the two are kind of taking a pause after the fighting, LifeWeaver says that their airspace is actually clear. So this wasn't an airborne attack. All of these Null Sector troops actually jumped on trains, or so it seems, from other cities under attack, and specifically took a trip out to the Arcology. And as I mentioned previously, there are actually pretty good reasons, even outside of whatever their main put suppressors on Omnics goal that Null Sector have, for them to show up at the Arcology. As we know from Overwatch Declassified, there are a bunch of decommissioned or lockdown god programs apparently the Arcology, so probably lots of not only very scientifically valuable pieces, but hey, if the god programs are something that Null Sector might find useful, they caused problems for the world once before, then maybe, just maybe, that would be a secondary motivation for them trying to take the place over. And finally, I liked how this, as sort of a sum up and then also as sort of a what's next point, brought kind of an end to one of the arcs of Symmetra's story. It kind of told us a lot about Symmetra and LifeWeaver and Vishkar, also in kind of one go, and it kind of gave a good setup as to what could be coming next for some of these characters. So Symmetra has found this conscious compromise, as we mentioned. She is going to try and understand how she can direct Vishkar's energies and Vishkar's kind of resources for the greater good. LifeWeaver, it seems, will stay at the Arcology, but who knows whether he'll get drawn into wider matters going on. And he actually gave Symmetra at the end of this a new path to follow. If she has questions, she needs to look into what happened to Dr. Bat, the founder of Vishkar, and that his vision was different to the path that the company actually took. Now, LifeWeaver says if she finds what he thinks is there, she's more than welcome at the Arcology, so hinting at foul play already. So Symmetra here has her path forward, and the quote at the end is pretty cool. Farewells weren't forever, she had answers to find, a world to improve, and whenever she needed it, a friend to return to. And a bunch more of them to come. If you like this video, throw a like, subscribe, let me know what you thought of Symmetra and LifeWeaver's adventure down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you like Overwatch Lore and Story, the rest of these short stories that we've been covering from Heroes Ascendant, check out all of the playlists here. All kinds of short story lore, animated shorts, voice lines, interactions, and more from Overwatch over the last 8 years, as well as other games too. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.